If you're joining us online, welcome. I'm glad you are. You might want to get your Old Testaments out and turn to the book of Daniel, the second chapter. If you're here, you've got that part of the Old Testament printed out for you in your bulletins. And on the other side, there's a place for notes. If you want to write down some of these, because we might get to some of them, we might not. Some of these passages that we're going to try to correlate to what's going on in Daniel's second chapter will be found in Acts chapter 1, Acts chapter 2, and Colossians chapter 1. Acts 1, Acts 2, Colossians 1, with probably some reference to some other places, because it's just a huge, huge thing. In fact, let me just warn you right up front. There are the story we're going to be looking at today has three major characters. These three main characters are God, without a doubt, but often overlooked in this story. God, and then a king by the name of Nebuchadnezzar, and then a prophet by the name of Daniel. Three big lessons associated with the three major characters. But in rehearsing this, it took me 45 minutes to get through the very first lesson. So we're going to put off some of this till next week, and we'll just stop right in the middle of this. So consider this a lot of background, okay? So let's start about 2,624 years ago. 2,624 years ago, there was a young man by the name of Nebuchadnezzar. He was leading his army, the army of the Babylonians, and was pretty much conquering the world. He had just defeated the Assyrians, who were the world power before him. He defeated also Egypt, who from time to time in their region of the world demonstrated themselves as still a force to be reckoned with. But he dominated them all. And it was about this time after his conquest of the world that he's about this. You know a little bit about your history. Babylonian Empire had been around a long, long time. What is it? The Code of Hammurabi. There's a lot that we know about them, but just about every historian will tell you that the zenith, their glory days, would be under this one king, Nebuchadnezzar, and this is when he ascends to the throne. Right before ascending to the throne in these military campaigns, though, he did something very strategic. Every place he conquered, he didn't simply just conquer them so that they would start paying tribute and bring money to his kingdom. That's one of the reasons they became so incredibly wealthy. The wealth of the nations was coming to them. He didn't just take tribute. He went through and grabbed the smartest of the smart. He grabbed the people he saw the greatest potential in to bring the most accomplished, the most skilled, the wisest, smartest people that were alive on the planet. He wanted them all in Babylon. He wanted them there to further train them, but also to glean the benefit of all their learning and all their expertise, because he wanted Babylon to be the best it could possibly be. Well, the reason that's important to us is when he went through the area of Judea, he brings this young man by the name of Daniel. He also grabs some others, and we'll talk about them when we go a little bit into the book in the future. I didn't say this. We're starting a new series today on the book of Daniel. Okay. We're going to talk about some other people, but right now I just want to focus on this one young man, because when we do our math, as best we can tell, this guy's probably a teenager. I think that's so significant when we talk about some of the lessons that we learned from him a little bit later. But Nebuchadnezzar brings him with some other young men, as he has done with almost all the nations that he has conquered. And he brought them back to Babylon so that he could use their expertise, their knowledge, their background. The reason that comes into play is in chapter 2. Chapter 2, the story we're going to be considering today, is about a dream that Nebuchadnezzar has. And this dream troubles him. You know, some people are more into dreams than other people. Some people want to tell everybody else about, this dream I had last night and all this stuff. But most of us, makes a little impact. Every now and then you have one of those dreams that bothers you all morning long, and you have to shake out of it. But it's pretty rare that you wake up in the cold sweat and that for days, that dream is just so bothering you. But that's the kind of impact this has on King Nebuchadnezzar. He is so in turmoil over this dream. He really wants to know what it means. So he turns to these guys he's collected, right? He turns to the wise men of Babylon, and he says, I want you to tell me about my dream. I want you to tell me what it means. And so the wise men come in and say, sure, we can do that. And by the way, from what we know, through the years, they would make records of, especially the kings, but anybody is significant, the dreams that they had, and then they would write that stuff down, and they would write down things that happened in history. So they had a collection of book scrolls. They had a collection of writings that they would go back to, and this kind of dream, well, this kind of thing happened with that kind of dream. So they're just all over this. They're like, yeah. Tell us your dream, and we'll give you the interpretation. All our expertise, we'll tell you likely what's going to happen. And Nebuchadnezzar says, no. I'm not going to tell you my dream. I want you to tell me my dream and then interpret my dream. And now, I want you to get what Nebuchadnezzar is doing here, because I'm not so sure he gets the full impact of this, but it's one of the things that God, through Daniel, is really going to seize on later. Whether he realized it or not, he was taking the situation and moving it out of the human realm and moving it into the realm of God. In fact, that's what his wise men tell him. The wise men tell him, listen, nobody's ever set a standard that high. Nobody ever raised the bar that high. That's impossible. Only, here's what the wise men said, only the gods know such things. Right? Nebuchadnezzar says, you're just arguing with me for time. He says, I've had enough of this. If you guys can't give me my dream and then the interpretation of my dream, I'm going to rip you limb from limb. I'm going to devastate your homes. Why? Because when you're gone, you're going to have no good thoughts of, well, at least my family's going to be taken care of. No, I'm getting rid of it all. Nebuchadnezzar's really mad. But what Nebuchadnezzar has done is, in essence, said this: I do not want an educated guess. I do not want the best that man can come up with. I want to know the truth. And the only way I'm ever going to know the truth, because I can't tell if this interpretation is 100% or not. But you know what? I got a pretty good indication that it really is the truth if you're able to tell me what I was dreaming about on my bed that I haven't told anybody. You see, that's going to be an indication to me that this is beyond human understanding. Okay, I know I'm barely into the story. I have to push pause. Okay, that's my pause button right there. I'm going to push pause for a second because to me, this is just a great example of where a lot of people will say, a lot of the Bible, and especially Ten Commandments, things like that, great stuff, but I got problems with parts of the Bible, right? You start talking about some of these miracles, and usually it's not this. This just gives me an opportunity to talk about this. Usually it's not so much dreams. Usually it's a fish swallowing somebody, and then 3 days later belching them up on the ground so they can get back to God. Or the big one, stopping the sun in the middle of the sky. Oh boy, eyes roll with that one. It's kind of, come on. Yeah, you know what I mean? I like a lot of the Bible, but when they throw in stories like that, it's kind of like, I just have a real hard time with that. I'm pausing for a reason. You take that part out of the Bible, you have ruined the Bible. Listen, the whole message of the Bible does not make consistent sense unless you leave in a dimension that goes beyond our dimension. I mean, from the very first verse of the Bible, I like the way Bob Russell used to say this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If you get verse number 1, then you got no problem with the rest of the Bible. But if you can't get verse number 1, you're going to have a problem with everything else God says. Either there is a God, and by definition, what we're talking about is that which is super, above, beyond us. In fact, I'm almost done here, but I really want you to grapple with this point with me for just a minute, because in Romans chapter 1 and 2, it just gives some powerful, powerful arguments about the fact that God has made himself known. It's just that too often humanity has suppressed what he has already made known to them. And I just want us to, dust that off and get it back to the forefront of our mind, because we're going to run into people all the time that, that part of I got problems with parts of the Bible, and that's the part I got problems. Well, listen, don't shy away. You take that part out of the message, you got no message. Listen, Jesus said it this way: if I don't rise from the dead, if I don't do something miraculous like that, the sign of Jonah, then you can discard my whole message. The point he was making is, if there's no dimension beyond this dimension, let's go home. It is not worth it. But there is a dimension beyond this dimension, and it is worth it. That's why I want us to rethink these things. Romans chapter 1, I didn't even give you Romans 1 and 2 earlier, did I? But anyway, Romans chapter 1, Romans chapter 2, it talks about look at creation. Look at creation. In the second chapter, it says, look within. Deep down in the heart of every person, there's some sort of moral code. Doesn't use that exact language, but it says, we by nature know that some things are right and some things are wrong. Where'd that come from? Listen, push that, because the more you push that, you're going to end up at a place where you got to have God. I don't have time to rehearse that because we've talked about that before. In fact, the first chapter, when we talk about creation itself, I like to go to the direction of design. You look at the intricacies, you look at all that. I mean, you find a watch in the middle of the field. You don't say to yourself, ooh, it evolved here over hundreds and hundreds. No, you find a watch in the middle of the field, you think to yourself, there was a watchmaker. Why? Because the intricacy. Okay, I don't even want to go there. I want to go a place I usually don't go. And very, very, very basic, but I want you to think about this. Just the fact we're here. Don't have to think through it very far. Just the fact we're here. How do you explain that? Oh, interesting you should bring that up, Mark, because there are a lot of scientific explanations for this. Yeah, let's go with those. And I don't want to get lost in the detail, but I want to go with those. Because when you get back to what's called origins, where it all starts, all science turns into hypothetical situations and just theories. And I'm okay with that. Let's go with that. Go back. And some people, it's going to take a long time to make them go back because they don't have just this universe. They have multiple universes you have to go through. Well, be patient, take a breath, and say, okay, keep going. Whatever it is that you actually think is a good explanation for all that is, that, how do you explain this? Eventually, you cannot have an infinite regress. Eventually, you're going to wind up at something called origin. Where'd it start? Everybody, and folks, I'm honest, atheist, theist, religious beliefs of different bents, you're going to run into the exact same hurdles, and here they are. To explain things, unlike anything that we observe in this universe, to explain this universe. Because everything in this universe has to have a cause. And what caused that? And what caused that? And what caused that? You're finally going to get back to the point where you have to have an uncaused cause. And that uncaused cause has to be qualitatively different from what we observe in this universe. And has to have sufficient power to explain what we have in this universe. Uncaused cause, different from everything we observe, with enough power to explain everything in this universe. Sounds a lot like God to me. I'm just telling you, instead of shying away, maybe I'm extra sensitive to this because I've been reading articles recently, and a lot of you are at fault for this because you constantly send me these emails and these articles and these podcasts about people who have stepped away from the faith. And time again, people who step away from the faith, when they do that publicly, they'll say things like, yeah, I started asking questions, and nobody wanted me to ask questions. Listen, as your preacher, I want you to know, I want you to ask questions. It's all fair game. Do you realize Christianity is the only world religion that says, ask away? Because the more you look, the more you find. If you really, honestly are going to study this, you're going to come to the same conclusion. There has to be a dimension beyond this dimension. Has to be. And God's the best explanation for that. Okay, I took way too long. I want to come back to my story, but this is the first point, the God dimension. You got to see this in everything, but especially in this story. Okay, I just pushed play. Where are we? He has this dream, and he's not even going to tell people what the dream is about, right? But he wants the interpretation. So he's so mad at all the wise men in Babylon that he's going to have them killed. So he sends his army out, his soldiers. They're going to kill all the guys. Well, that means Daniel, because he's in training at this point, but he's going to be one of the people that's put to death. So when the soldiers get there to kill Daniel, Daniel's like, why are you killing us? And he tells them what the king had happened. Nobody can explain his dream. He said, well, wait a minute. He said, let me pray about this. He gets some of his Jewish friends to pray with him, and God reveals the dream to him. So he says to the guard, listen, you don't have to kill any of the wise men. Just tell the king, I've got the answer to his dream. So they bring Daniel back into the presence of Nebuchadnezzar. And this is the point of the story that, honestly, in Daniel's 2nd chapter, as a kid, when I was reading this always bothered me, because the first words out of his mouth, Nebuchadnezzar's already mad. He already wanted to kill all the wise men. And he says, do you know the meaning of my dream? And Daniel says, no. And I'm like, did you have to start with no? Right? But he's making a point, and this is the point that I don't want us to miss, that I'm trying to really emphasize this morning, and that's this. No person can do this, king. You've set the bar too high, but there is a God. And he has revealed to me what your dream is and the meaning of your dream. Well, how are you going to prove that? Well, let me tell you what your dream was. And here's what the dream was. He said, while you're on your bed, he said, you saw this image, huge image, a head of gold. The shoulders were of silver. The torso was of bronze, the upper legs. And then the legs, the lower part of the legs were iron. And then eventually, as they went into the feet and the toes, it was iron mixed with clay. And then while you were looking at this impressive image, there was a stone cut without hands. What does that mean? It means no humans involved. It's a God thing, a stone cut without hands. And the stone comes along and rolls into this image, and it devastates the image. In fact, the dust, like dust in the wind, it's all just totally gone. And then that stone, during the time of the iron legs, which crashed the entire image, grows into a mountain so great that it covers the entire planet. And Nebuchadnezzar, I'm sure at that point, closing his mouth like, that's it? Okay, what does it mean? And he says, here's the meaning of the dream. God is telling you what's going to happen. Whoa. You talk about more evidences for God. Boy, the very fact that he's interpreting this dream. Here's the interpretation of the dream. He says, you, O king, are the head of gold. There's never been a kingdom like your kingdom. And I tell you, you look at this, the world had never seen anything like the Babylonian Empire. We'll probably have opportunities to talk about this in future weeks, but fairly represented by the head of gold. He said, following you, there's going to be another kingdom. They're going to be the next world power, and they're going to take over from you. Their glory is not going to be as great as your glory. That's why they're represented by the silver. Later on in the book of Daniel, he's actually going to tell them what kingdoms are going to come and replace his kingdom. It's going to be the kingdoms of the Medes and the Persians. You know, history bears that out. After the Medes and the Persians, there's going to be another kingdom, and Daniel, a little bit later in the book of Daniel, actually tells us what that kingdom is. It's the kingdom of Greece. You know what? History bears that out. After the Babylonians, you get the Medes and the Persians. After the Medes and the Persians, then it's Greece. After Greece, fairly represented by the legs of iron, because it says just like iron crushes everything, there's going to be a kingdom that just crushes all opposition. And that's a great description of what Rome did to the world. And the Roman Empire, that's the empire that follows Greece. But here's the interesting thing. It's not that Rome is followed by another world power. If you've read anything about the fall of Rome, it's a fuzzy thing. Why? Because it wasn't just one decisive loss. Rome deteriorated from within. It's like iron that turns to iron mixed with clay. You talk about a perfect picture of what's coming. But here's where it really gets good. He says, during the time of that kingdom, there's going to be something established by God, cut without hands. It's a God thing. And this God thing's going to come along, and it's going to be greater than any kingdom the world has ever known. It's going to devastate all opposition, and it will grow and spread over the entire globe. Folks, I want you to see how this was fulfilled. When Jesus came during the Roman Empire, there was a forerunner that God set ahead of time. His name was John the Baptist. John the Baptist went about preaching the kingdom of God is at hand. In other words, God's doing something, getting ready to do something in our days. When Jesus started his ministry, he sent out the 12 on missions, and he said, here's what I want you to preach. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. God's getting ready to start something. He turns to his followers after he completed his mission. He said, I want you to stay in Jerusalem till power comes on you, till God starts this thing going. And then once he comes upon you, I want you to be my witnesses here, first of all in Jerusalem, then Judea, then Samaria. Then I want you to go all over the world. So after hearing that, they waited there in Jerusalem. And while they're waiting there in Jerusalem, a terrific thing happens, and it's recorded in Acts, the 2nd chapter. There's this noise they hear, and this noise comes from above. And then they see this huge fire. And this fire separates into 12 different segments. I know, we're going back with the supernatural again. Here you go. It's 12 different segments, and this 12 segments of this fire are hovering over 12 people. I don't know about you. I'm there that day. I'm thinking, I want to see what's going on, right? You see these people with fire over their head, and they start talking. And when they talk, and it actually lists all the different nationalities that were present that day, and it said everybody from different nations heard it in their own tongue. It's like the guy from Korea hearing it in Korean. It's like the guy from France hearing it in French. It's like the guy from Germany hearing it in German. It's like the English person hearing it in English. And they all know, I'm hearing this in my native tongue, and I know you hear it in your native tongue. How? He's only speaking in one language. How can we hear it in all different languages? You cannot explain that. And that is the point. This is a God thing. And what happened that day, people who understood it was a God thing said, I've got to be part of this. And it says in Acts chapter 2, verse 41, 3,000 people were baptized. They joined. How'd they do that? They were baptized into that group. What does it say in Colossians chapter 1, verse 13? When you are baptized into Christ, you are delivered from, here's what it says, the domain of darkness and brought into the kingdom of his Son. You know what started that day? The church. That's right. You know how else you could say it? God's kingdom started that day. And what happened once it started? I'll tell you what happened. They went out and they told everybody else about it. And so it wasn't just in Jerusalem, it was Judea, Samaria, the remote parts of the earth. In fact, in Thessalonica, over in Acts, the 17th chapter, the people there said, these people who have turned the world upside down, they're in our town too, and they're having the same impact. Listen, for the last 2,000 years, it wasn't just in the first century, time and time and time again, the message just keeps going all over the world, and it's growing. Listen. I hope you already know this, but I want to review this real quickly. I just heard some more statistics last week when I was away from you. Heard this wonderful report. I got to share it with you because news usually doesn't cover this. Every now and then they get little pieces because governments don't want you to know about this. But did you know we just got some reports recently that tell us that some of the mission work that goes on in Central Africa right now, I'm talking the heart of Africa, they guess, because of the number of churches well exceeding 1,000, which, by the way, I am talking about Restoration Movement churches. Just the Bible. That's all. That's it. Let's just do the Bible. Well over 1,000, and they guess north side of Africa. You go to India, we already know this because of our missionaries, started over 1,100 churches just in South India. The number of Christians in the Philippines has probably grown to greater number than all the Christians here in the United States. And that's in the Philippines. Listen, there's example after example. A couple of people here in the church were sharing with me some news articles about the growth of Christianity in Iran. Did you read about that? In Iran? Last year at the missionary convention, we heard from a lot of our missionaries, listen, this doesn't get publicized, and especially where Islam is in control. They don't want anybody to know this. But in Iran, they're turning to Christianity in droves. Listen, this mountain has encompassed the earth, and it continues to. You know why? It's a God thing. Okay. Yes. So, two quick stories to wrap all this up because it's wonderful that it's a God thing. But here's what I want you to know. You and I get to participate in a God thing. Here are the two stories. They both come from the exact same preacher. He's retired now, but through the years, I've just admired a lot of the things that he has done. Everybody's got clay feet, but I tell you what, this guy's had so much happen to him. So here you go, two stories. First one I already told you, so I'll make this quick. He was teaching a class back before, he preaches all over the place since he retired, but back when he was still in the located ministry, he was teaching a class like our foundations class. And if you want to know more about what kind of church this is, in between the services, we have a foundation class. Love for you to come to some of those classes. We get into a lot of the nitty-gritty of the Bible. Anyway, he was doing that. At the end of the class, there was a college-age girl that came to him with a friend, right? So after class, they're talking a little bit. He recognized college-age girl. She was a member of the church there, but she brought a friend with her. And she said, my friend has some questions about Jesus. And he's like, well, hey, if I can help. Well, long story short, he found out in just a few minutes of talking to her that she didn't really have questions about Jesus. She had questions to try to justify the way she was living her life, right? And sometimes it's harder to tell. Sometimes it's pretty easy. And he's like, I don't want to be rude to this girl or whatever. But when you're really ready to talk about Jesus, I'm ready to talk to you. Here's some stuff that I think, and he gave her some suggested books that she could read if she's honestly seeking. Here you go. Well, that ended that conversation after a few minutes. He turns and he looks at the college girl who brought her friend. First time he notices, she's got tears coming down her cheeks. And she apologizes for crying, and she said, I just so wanted her to become a Christian. You know, I don't know if she cried on a daily basis. I don't know this girl. But I do know I've seen bald, big biker dudes cry at a baptism. Can I explain that to you? Because we get it. This is not you're joining our club, you're part of our group. No, you just made a God decision that's bigger than this life. Here's the last story. Same preacher. This is after he retired. He and his wife received an invitation to come over to somebody's house. They hadn't seen this person a long time because he's no longer preaching in that church. And it's a name of somebody that was going to that church a long time ago. He's kind of scratchy. He said, oh, yeah, I think I remember them. Received an invitation to come over and have a meal with them around Christmas season. And so he's like, he talks to his wife and says, hey, we've got nothing going on. You know, it was nice of them to, but let's stop by for a little bit. They asked us to stop by. Let's stop by. And so they went, you know, close to the Christmas season. I don't know how many days in advance, but they go and when they ring the doorbell, the guy who opens the door, they kind of recognize this guy. He's one of the guys who used to go to the church that he preached for. And he introduced his wife to them. And he said, and here's my sister, and here's my other sister. So it's a man and his wife, and his two sisters, their husbands, and all their kids, 19 kids, right? So you got 3 siblings with all the children, 19 children, 3 couples. And the preacher and his wife quickly, you know, which is not like the other? This is obviously a family thing. Why did they invite us to their family Christmas thing, you know? And they felt honored, you know, this is kind of nice. And all the kids were running around playing. It was really great. And they said, it's time to eat. And boy, they had this big spread and everything. But before they started to eat, they pulled out 2 chairs and they asked the preacher and his wife to sit down there. And they said, you're probably wondering why we asked you to our family Christmas get together. And he's like, well, yeah, you know, it's not like a whole bunch of people from the church. We're the only ones not part of your family. Well, I'd like to explain. And one of the sisters started first. I guess the oldest sister. She said, our parents, we were all quite young, were going through a divorce. It was a terribly messy thing. It was a really dark time in all of our lives. We weren't brought up in the church, never really thought about the Lord. We were just suffering. And she said, there was an older woman, middle-aged woman, that invited me to come to your church. I was searching for whatever I could find, you know, some sort of hope. So I thought, why not? I came to church. She said, I learned so much about the Bible, I just kept wanting to come back, just something about it. I finally decided I'm going to become a Christian. I was baptized into Christ in your church. I met my future husband in your church. He also realized just how important this Christianity thing was. And so we decided before we started our family that we're going to go to the mission field. She said we ended up having a lot of our kids in Africa. After we were in Africa for a few years, we came back here, and he's preaching at a church, and they named the state. It wasn't where they were living right there. They were just visiting over Christmas. So they've been in Africa. Now they're in another place. The next sister stood up and said, you know what? I started coming to your church because my sister. After a while, got to me too. I knew I had to make a decision. I was baptized into Christ. And I was in the same situation. My husband and I, we had already had our children, but we had a lot of freedom because I was homeschooling. So we went to Papua New Guinea because we're both pretty good linguists, and we decided to translate the Bible so other people could read the Bible in their native tongue. So we spent so many years in Papua New Guinea. Then the son finally said, well, it's my turn. And he talked about because of his sisters, he became a Christian, was baptized into Christ. And he said he works on a college campus. He says it's very difficult, but he supports and is kind of involved in campus ministries there, trying to tell people about Jesus there. After each one of the siblings told their stories, then the older kids, not all the kids, but the older ones, old enough to make a decision, one by one, they came by, and it was kind of like the first one said, hi, my name's James. I got baptized July last year. Next one said, hey, my name's Amanda. I got baptized just a few weeks ago. Next one said, and just right on down the line. And I'm guessing there's probably not a dry eye there. They said, we just want to thank you for faithfully preaching the truth and telling us about God. But you know what hit that preacher? He said, all these people in the kingdom of God because one middle-aged woman saw a young girl who was going through a difficult time and said, "Why don't you come to church with me?" We have a challenge going on. It's called Each One Bring One. I know some people might think that's silly. I don't. You know why? This is a God thing.